Councilor Moreau
Here.
and the Assistant Mayor.
Here. And Councilor Tabor.
Yeah, and I,
What about staff? Our housing navigator, Howard, and our
Not on the
director of
committee.
planning and sustainability for the
You're
record.
gonna lose your job.
Staff in the room.
or get no support. One of the-
Perfect.
and Peter Britt. We have some minutes to approve. Has everyone had a chance to read the minutes? Okay.
Yes, and we have, may I make a motion to make some changes to the meeting minutes of July 18th? It was one of our site visits that Joanna Kelly is listed as absent from the meeting, but then she's actually listed as making, she convened the meeting and and made a motion at the end.
And took the roll call.
Saying
Which,
wise things.
Which actually was me, not Joanna. I'd love to look as beautiful as her, but you know.
Okay, that's enough. So I'd second that motion.
Yeah,
Which one?
All in favor?
I
And do we have a motion to approve the remaining minutes?
So moved.
And those minutes with the, as amended?
so moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
I
Great. Working group updates. There's been some interesting talk about composition of our work groups and trying to keep them to 4.
Is it 4 or 5?
What I recall is that if there, with the previous, before Andrew came on board, if there was more than 4, it would be a quorum and then it wouldn't be allowed. But with Andrew being added, we can go up to 5 without it being a quorum.
Okay.
So that's my understanding, and
So the financial working group can include Dagan and still be kosher.
Okay.
Byron, you can stay in if you want.
Okay.
Or you can move and abandon us.
Don't do it. An update just as we go through Bulletin A, the zoning working group. We are meeting on the
Friday,
11th.
October 11th.
Friday, October 11th. So we will have an update at the meeting prior to that.
After that.
After that, prior to that. It's your doozy in this group. They're pumping in here.
Parking and transportation has not met.
Okay.
Does not have a meeting scheduled yet.
We can work on that,
We can work on that.
probably before the next meeting as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then the financial working group.
We had a meeting?
Yes. Would you like to report out?
Yeah, gladly. It was very much like let's try to organize and divide and conquer. So we figured out a list of focus areas. Let me just see if I can pull up that email.
I think one was the hometown loan program.
Which I think we put to Byron.
Yeah.
He was not there, so we got to choose for him. He was at a work conference, which is not to make him sound derelict in his duties. Then the Housing Trust, Megan and I are going to tackle that, and there was a lot of great stuff in this week's packet regarding trusts. And Jen was going to take on tax credits and developer incentives. And then we just kind of listed a series of questions, but I think we're very much in that first phase of trying to figure out what are, these are our 3 priorities and how do we address and tackle those.
so send me who you have for those focus
Gladly.
and what they are, and I'll feed you some information that I have.
Great.
Of note is with the parking and transportation group is the grant we just went after is going to have a lot of emphasis on addressing parking in the regulatory aspects of the city, both with the zoning as well as the subdivision and land use development. So that will be more and more pertinent coming up.
Okay, thank you.
And then, does I guess this is more for the parking and traffic group. Do we want to get them the just traffic study that concluded? I know it doesn't necessarily tie into.
Well, there was recommendations on zoning and other
Yeah.
things in there, so
Yeah,
that
so
might be
maybe we
helpful.
should get that to that.
We can
sub-
get you a draft. It's not quite.
Yeah, it's not 100. It's not 100%
We can get
done.
a draft.
Yeah, if we can maybe get a draft to that
Yep.
working group so that
Yep.
you can see the work that has been done.
Sounds fun.
Probably should be sent to the zoning group too,
Yeah, so we will,
to talk about zoning around parking and affordable housing.
okay,
Yeah, because I think one of the questions was, should parking
be waived.
be
Be
waived or
waived.
be part of site applications?
Yes. Instead of a conditional use permit.
Right.
Or
Right.
should yeah, there was a lot of different things.
One more thing on the financial group. Jen and I had a call with Clay Adams of Mascoma Bank to talk about the Upper Valley Loan Fund, which was interesting. That's sort of an all-private sector effort, but it began with a bunch of business leaders over there. They raised $10 million, and that's loaned out at 1.5%, which when people are putting together affordable housing, that can be part of their capital stack, and it really helps them do more. And they had good participation from a whole bunch of businesses in town. And they're looking at, they've got 80 units built with it already, and they're looking at 260.
Wow.
So is that 10 million or that 1%? Is that like loan going to the developer for the purposes of affordable housing? Is that who's like taking out the loan on that?
Right. Typically nonprofit
Okay.
workforce housing developers. And then you had some follow-on conversations?
Yeah, so I thought that was so interesting. Basically, just Mascoma Bank got together with Dartmouth Health and the college, all of whom, all the big employers in the Upper Valley, and said, let's raise this money. They had, what was the name of the group that they used? Evernorth. Evernorth is managing the fund for them. But they're looking at this as an investment. They get a return on their dollars, but also it's community benefit and employee benefit. And so I had some colleagues who were meeting with Service Credit Union, who mentioned it to Service Credit Union, who was very interested in learning more. And so Service Credit Union is speaking to Clay Adams of Mascoma Bank, I believe tomorrow. And they basically were like, we would love to run with something like this. And I have offered our support to say, we have some other people we'd like to introduce you to. But as you said, it really was a business sort of,
Employers.
yeah.
We need employees.
There's a need for housing up there for.
Right. And it's such a small community relative, but we could definitely replicate it here.
Two other interesting things. One is that Evernorth did a whole feasibility study, just like a nonprofit doing a capital campaign. They went and talked to all the employers and said, would you be interested? And came back and said, this is how much we think you can raise.
Yeah.
Go for it. Give it the green light. And the other thing was that I've forgotten my point. It's mostly loans, though, and they're also insisting, when they're a part of the loan to a developer, that they get a really big percentage of affordable in the building. That's their terms that they set. Not always 100%, but very high percentage. John?
Yeah. Now, especially with the large employers, what is that impact? Is that driven towards their own employees or just the entire community? Or, in other words, when you're talking about, well, Dartmouth Medical, Mary Hitch, whatever you want to call it,
They're Dartmouth Health now.
I know
But
that.
I learned that.
Yes, I but is the motivation not only an investment and also community, but does it help their own employees?
I think it does, but they weren't like if they made an investment in a development, it was not that their employees got priority.
Okay.
But
All
they
right.
recognized that in order for Dartmouth Health to get doctors to come to the region, doctors want to have a nice restaurant to go to, and a place to be able to fix their car and services like that. So,
Okay.
rising tide situation.
Thank you.
They also, and I wish I had taken notes on this, but they mentioned, or Clay mentioned, I think it was Dartmouth Health was building 80 single-family homes at a really,
Yep.
they were talking about $225,000 to build a single-family home.
Right.
Some kind of like prefabrication situation.
Right,
That was
right, they're
very
modular.
interesting. Yeah. So this isn't the only way that employers are trying to get more housing in the region. That was, Dartmouth Health is building this for their employees, but it's one way.
Yeah.
So the single-family homes Dartmouth Health was building was specifically for their employees?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Were they making access of the funds?
I don't think they were using that. I mean, 10 million is not going to go that far.
Sure.
But they thought it could do 260 units, which is pretty good.
Yeah, they've got a roadmap.
But yes, this was sort of like in addition to. Yeah.
And Dartmouth jumped in because they did their own study and found that they were more expensive for faculty than Palo Alto, California. As a percentage of their salaries.
Wild.
Wow. So they had to do something.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow up with Ben Wheeler at Piscataqua and talk to him about it. So we'll see what we can get.
Okay. Next is the initial discussion on programming and funds of a workforce housing trust. Everyone looked over their packet, got the information of the first established housing trust in 1993, and then the workforce housing trust in 2009, and then some examples. And then I am going to pass it over to Howard to expand upon it.
Right, so the one established in 1993 has a specific mission.
Yes.
To help first-time home buyers. That's clear to everybody, and it's got a lot of money in it. So it warrants some investigation to find out how much they're loaning out and the frequency, and to see if it reflects 1995 home prices or 2025 home prices. So
I can tell you, as someone who tried to use that a couple of years ago, the amount that you can't make over a certain
Right.
percentage, and then if you at the rate they were at, you could only get financed for like a $350,000 house, which is not something you were going to buy in Portsmouth.
Right.
So, but that, I remember the initial conversation, and we'll have more conversation of this. Part of the issue was the structure within the bank and like the bank part of it.
Yeah.
And so maybe it furthers, like you said, deeper discussion with the trustees of the trust, right? That's what it's called? Trustees. Yeah, the trustees, and figuring out too with legal if it has, because right now the partnership is with Citizens Bank, and maybe it could be potentially beneficial to move to a more regional or local bank that has some flexibility. I'm not sure. Piscataqua Service Credit Union, maybe multiple credit unions. Maybe we have multiple partners that have different parameters. But I know as a person who was trying to use that to buy my first home in Portsmouth, the limitations of income of where you then start to not qualify mean you can't qualify for a mortgage in a home here anyways.
Yeah, we
And
still
and I think that, the other thing is that, unless I'm mistaken, it's still 65,000 that you get from the program. Basically, the way, if I can, what the program does is it gives you two pieces of money to help with your down payment.
Yeah, there's the down payment assistance, which is $10,000, which doesn't have to be repaid until you
Well,
sell or it's no longer.
There's two. There's one
Yeah.
that begins after 10 years.
Yep.
And the other one begins, you don't pay off till you sell the
Yeah.
property. But there's only $65,000, and because it's interesting, I don't want to go through it again because I already had a discussion on it. But I mean, I was on the council when we developed the program.
Yeah.
And it was developed because of whatever you want to call it. Seacrest Village, Mariners Village was being sold, and all the people were being forced out of the city. And the idea was, what can we do to give these people a vehicle to stay in Portsmouth. That's really what it was all about. And that's, again, back then, as I see, I mean, I don't remember all of the details, but $700,000 was a lot of money back then, but I don't know. It would be interesting, as Howard is indicating, kind of look at, has these amounts changed? I don't know if they have or not, but if they haven't, then that's, certainly something that needs to be addressed. And the other thing is that, as Joe is saying, trying to meet the income guidelines and then have the prices of the houses, it's just such a,
Yeah, like I remember there was a stipulation in it that blew my mind that you could only have so much in your savings.
Yes.
You could only have so much asset afterwards, and I was like, well, what if my boiler breaks and that's $5,500, and you're telling me I can only have 10? There's like almost like you were penalized because they wanted you to put so much in, and it's like, well,
That's why we didn't.
yeah,
There was something, I know that, well, my husband qualified for, there was something at the end where it just fell apart because it wasn't the right,
yeah.
it wasn't the smart decision.
It
wasn't the smart decision for a first-time homeowner, is
Yeah.
how it ended up.
I just
believe.
remember
there was
that line of like you can only have $10,000 in a bank
Assets,
account
yeah.
afterwards, and I was like, okay.
What if everything breaks?
Well, there was $705,000 when it was for seed money. It's now up to 2.4 million.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So it's generating a lot of interest.
It's not getting used.
I know, it'd be interesting to see how many people
so
were
that's a
denied
lazy
or walked
asset
away.
Yeah, do we know what the current usage is on it? Like
No, but-
loans per month, per year?
Well, Howard, you put me in, gave me the name of the person who is one of the trustees. So if we collected a list of these questions, like I was intending to reach out to them and have a conversation, we could
Yeah.
ask
There's
all
three
these questions.
trustees, which I think they're predominantly bankers. There's the woman that works for the city that oversees the funds.
Yeah.
And then the CDBG person, the community block, she's the one I believe goes to the trustees to ask for any funds to help somebody with the
Elise.
with the assistance. So
I also noticed in there that they said that you can spend the interest expense on advertising the program. And that's another question, like, are they doing that?
Well, it's kind of interesting, and that was one of the things I wanted to bring up, is that, how do people know about this program? And I'm just going to take a quick second, but really there's only two real groups that are eligible for it: city employees and people who live in Portsmouth. That's it. The city employees, it's kind of interesting, the city employees can vouch. When my wife worked for the school department, on a periodic basis, once every couple of months, on your payroll stub, there was a notice about the program. So if you're an employee from the city of Portsmouth and get a payroll stub, every 2 or 3 months there's a little reminder about this program. So that's one way that they advertise it to city employees. If you look at your pay stub, you see the program. Outside of that, I think it's more word of mouth than anything else. And I was involved in a situation a few years ago where somebody was looking to buy a house with the program and talked to a very prominent local realtor who'd never heard of the program. So you're right, and the fact is that, first of all, I don't know, as Joe's indicating, how many people would actually fit into that little narrow sliver that qualifies. But even if it was bigger, I don't know how people would know about it. So, and that kind of picks up on what I think you were saying. Yeah.
Precisely. And,
Yeah.
advertising is not as expensive as it used to be,
Yeah.
and much more effective than it used to be.
Yeah, and again, the only drawback is that, and again, I'm not an advertising person, but you want to make sure it's directed at those who qualify. And, one of the tough things is to make sure that it doesn't go out to people who don't qualify.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we would want to have a conversation with the trustees and try to compel them to expand the pool of applicants who would qualify, or expand the criteria to allow for more people to qualify before we started advertising it and having all these people.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things too is, and again, I know we had a brief conversation about it at one point in time. The thought behind it at the time is that this is city taxpayer money, and it should be available only to people in Portsmouth. And, again, it's a policy decision that can be made and changed, but at the time, there was a discussion about opening it up, and they said, well, why do we want to give someone who lives in Rochester money to buy a house in Portsmouth? I mean, so.
Yeah, I think there can be, and again, I think this is where we'll have to have a conversation with legal too about what can or cannot be changed once it's accepted by the trustees and the trusts and it's set into that motion of, there's certain things that are dictated by policy, but that policy can't conflict with legally we're allowed to do.
Oh, sure.
Whether that means expanding, like I would personally be in support of saying if you've worked in Portsmouth for 10 years, you know what I mean?
If you were displaced from Portsmouth because you lost
Yeah,
your...
if you lived in Portsmouth for the majority of the last, but again, that is where legal comes in to say you can or cannot do this, or hey, we understand the intention of changing this, but that opens a floodgate to now you have to worry about all of these other legal ramifications. This may just be, you know what I mean? So that's why I think once we'll pass the ball back to Howard, but once we meet with the trustees of the trust and we meet with legal or get a report back from legal, then we can kind of figure out and obviously talk to the bank, because at the end of the day, we on our side can, I feel like, say certain things, but you still have to qualify for the loan, the initial loan from the bank.
Right.
Howard, you've recommended that we establish a new trust. Would that be part of the offerings that the trust could have in their bylaws, like that we can?
Yeah, I have become better educated since I sent that email. It was a recommendation because I believe that the way the Workforce Housing Trust was established was it was being supervised by the trustees, and Peter can explain more about what's come to light about it. So I was partially incorrect about that. When it comes to the Workforce Housing Trust, it essentially is something that I think that this committee should take up and work up any changes to the wording and make considerations about essentially moving this forward as opposed to creating a whole new one.
Okay.
Because of funding mechanisms I've learned about and everything else that Peter can explain about. But before that, when I was the town planner in Georgetown, Mass., we had an affordable housing trust that was funded through the Community Act, which was additional leverage on some of the property taxes that came through. And what we tried to do is provide down payment assistance as one of the many facets of the trust. And we had a condition in there, which was you need to have been a resident.
Yeah.
And it wasn't intended for people to use to move into town, but you need to in some way be a resident of the town and to be able to tap in and stay there. Because we were a little worried about outflow as opposed to remaining in.
Right.
And then there's lots of structures similar to what you talked about in terms of if it was being used, that it wouldn't have to be repaid until certain terms, and when you went to sell the house after 4 years, the principal had to come back, but you also had to give back a certain percentage of
Your profit.
the value that went up as it relates to the value of what you borrow from the trust. So there's all types of structure to it, but Peter can better explain the structure of the trust that we looked at.
Well, just the basics anyway. I talked to Judy Renaud, who administers our trusts and works with the trustees, and the way this trust was set up back in 2009 is that the only way the trustees can spend the money is if the city council tells them to spend the money. And I think that's probably similar to a lot of our trusts, but at least this trust, that's how it's set up specifically. And so the trust is set up, it references the Workforce Housing Blue Ribbon Committee, which probably should be updated to this Workforce Housing Blue Ribbon Committee, but it's set up just like you
That
want to
was
set up
the
a trust.
2008.
You have the report, yeah, I just found it, we couldn't find it for a while. So that report is the reference report that probably everything in the trust that's there right now would work. If there was money to put in the trust, you could take the money and have the trustees put it into an account. When I talked to the accountant who does it, Judy, she said I would just set up an account and put it in, but you have everything you need here to set it up. If you need to change the conditions of the trust, that's something that we can do. You have to send it to the Attorney General and they have to approve it, but it's something that we do regularly on all of our trusts in the city, so it's not something we're unfamiliar with. So I think, to Howard's point, reviewing this trust language that we have and seeing where we want to change it would be the way to go. We can talk to the legal department in the meantime, see if there's anything I'm telling you that isn't true, but I think it will check out. And then things that you want to change, like there's percentages of income and that type of thing in terms of the whereas statements, which are probably fine. But in terms of the actual conditions, that's where if the conditions don't match what we want to do or this group wants to do, then we'd want to change that. But really, the only way money can be spent out of this trust is for the city council to spend it, and with a recommendation from this committee would be the way it would work. So if this committee says we want to take in money from a developer or give money to a developer, you'd send that recommendation to the city council, and the city council would, if they agree, they'd tell the trustees, and the trustees would spend the money. So it's kind of set up that way now.
And I talked to Tom Watson of the trustees, and he corroborated everything you said. It's
Oh,
ready
good.
to go.
Good.
It was never funded.
Right.
In fact, the original thinking was that the city would sell off surplus land and put those proceeds into the Workforce Housing Trust Fund. And then the trust fund would be used to do rental assistance and to build units, build projects.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I am curious as to whether or not the way it's written, because one of the things I always thought a housing trust would be really cool to do would be to help a homeowner build an ADU that then would stay rented at affordable rates for a period of time based off of that either grant or low interest loan or whatever, in order to help that sort of production. That would
Yep.
be really cool. And I don't know, because that's sort of a new thing since that was written, whether or not it really speaks to the ability to do that.
I think that would fall under the category of housing creation.
Yeah.
That Kittery has a great program where they lend out, and I believe I've mentioned it to the committee before, they lend out money to a homeowner wanting to build an ADU. And I believe the limit's $75,000, but in the lease, what can happen is that you can make it a condition of that loan. You don't need to repay it, but you need to make it restricting on certain salary or cost of rental and things like that.
And I think the second condition
Would
fits
would
that.
cover it.
Looks like it.
In fact, if you cross-reference with the guide that you sent out from Massachusetts about creating a trust, the only thing that is not in the current workforce housing trust is the ability to lend for mortgages. Everything else, it matches up. So they have all the abilities of a trust as was recommended in that guidebook for setting one up.
Do we feel like that was maybe written in there because we had the first time homeowners buyer program trust, so they were like,
That was
we
my
already-
assumption.
We already have this, so we don't need to add it into this.
But if they're not flexible in updating
That.
their offerings, then why wouldn't we take that on as part of this housing trust and make it more viable for the modern era?
Exactly.
We should write it in specifically in the structures of it. So. The one other thing I want to point out that when Peter brought up things that could change would be earning between 80% and 120% of median family incomes. The goal that we've talked about here is to provide on the spectrum percentages, and so to drop that from 80 down to 60.
And keep it up to 120 though.
I was going to say, do we want to go as high as 120? I guess.
I think so.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah, we got to ask.
Is there any way to figure out the AMI just for Portsmouth proper,
Yeah.
rather than just the
I think I'll Google it, but I'm pretty sure we have it.
Well, we have the AMI for like the Portsmouth-Rochester census area, but
Right.
I would imagine perhaps Portsmouth might be a little bit different.
This says
Portsmouth has an annual salary, just Portsmouth, of
In six?
100,160. So you take 100% of that,
Yeah.
or 80% or 60, and you'll get the percentage.
this says around $100,000 is the
median.
median.
I think there's, the questions we can tackle are, should we use the existing ordinance or scrap that and go with something de novo? But I think what Peter's saying is this is fully functional.
Yep.
Matches
You mean the
purpose.
trust, not an ordinance.
Yeah.
Twice, yeah.
And what I had misspoken because Peter explained to me it had actually gone through the state, and so I
state has approved it.
Has approved it,
Yes.
so it's functional.
It seems like a time saver.
Yep, exactly, that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
No need to reinvent the wheel.
Especially-
Yeah.
And the other aspect of that, though, is that, we all know this, but New Hampshire, what's allowed in New Hampshire, let me put it this way, something that may be done in Massachusetts may not be enabling legislation in New Hampshire. Same thing with Maine. So again, we can look at all of those things and certainly look to incorporate them. But one of the things that hangs over our head is the fact is, if the state doesn't specifically allow you to do something, you can't do it.
My question, just generally on the two trusts, is if the one thing that the 93 Trust is doing relative to the mortgage assistance isn't what the 2009, is there any way of combining these things or sort of simplifying the situation? Or is like the 1993 Trust like so baked that it would be difficult to deconstruct that and like see, yeah? Or if
I
that's,
think
yeah.
you'd have to clear. I don't think you can take
They've got
the money. No.
different
Yeah.
purposes.
And I think the big thing to think about is that I feel like that money has grown because the money's not being used. Because it was
Yes,
like
yeah.
$700,000 and now it's over $2 million, and it's simply because it's been invested, and we haven't been using it. So ideally, that's a revolving door that somebody has used some of the money to buy their first home. They've got enough equity. It's been 10 years. They're selling that home, paying that money back in.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it should never be at this huge number in such an inaccessible way, in my world.
Right, so the actions is sort of reopening the limits around that via discussion with those trustees in terms of the parameters there, and then also actually funding the 2009. Yeah.
Right.
I think
And
you're
I had the same reaction you did, Byron, of
Yeah.
why not merge these? But they have different founding documents.
Yeah, I just wanted to pose. Yeah.
And one's strictly about first-time homeowners, right? We
Right.
want the other one to be an existing homeowner, right? So
Yeah, I love
you
the
really
idea
have to
on
keep
the
that separate.
ADU assistance. I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
But it does raise the question, and the council has the power to do this, if there's a surplus of funds for the purpose of the first-time home buyers, could the council repurpose those into the other?
Well, I think that, again, getting back to what Peter said, all of these fall under the Attorney General's office, so they would have
Well, and I would add the language of the first-time homebuyer trust, I haven't looked at as closely. I don't know what the mechanism is to shift things and do things. This one clearly says it could be dissolved by the council, which I'm assuming there's a mechanism for the money to go somewhere if that happens. But I don't know about the other one and how it's
Right.
mechanism.
In any event, the charitable trust division would have to approve it no matter what.
They would have a say.
I'm looking at it on the trustee website, and I, in the 93, do not see dissolve language the same as,
As this one has?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
and it could just be that it's not And I'm looking at the criteria.
There's probably a statutory mechanism to do so if it's no longer needed, but the question is, it's still, the state's
needed.
going to have to give us permission.
Yes, right, because it's a trust.
Do we want to invite a member of the trustees
I
to
think-
come in and speak and explain
I think-
activity, or just
Yes.
receive a letter from them, or?
I think it would be more beneficial to bring in our community development director, Elise, first, because she's the one who really puts this out in the community and is the one who initiates the
implements it.
program and discusses it with people. I will say, because I just pulled it up, because we were talking about the questioning of housing, and I will say in this, in the guideline, it does say people who are currently a Portsmouth resident and have lived here for the last 2 years or has resided in Portsmouth in the past for at least 10 years and are currently living within a 30-mile radius.
Right.
Or who is permanent full-time employee.
Yeah.
So that does cover what we all
Permanent
wondered
full-time
about,
employees.
Yeah.
which is the former resident
Mm-hmm.
who lives within a certain
30
distance.
miles.
Yeah.
And as long as they lived here for 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it may be possible to change those really too tight income restrictions,
Yeah.
like we did with the senior exemption.
Part of
Well, I
those
think
might be
that-
set
I think
by the
that-
bank, though.
Well, so that's my big issue.
That's why we need to talk
My
about
big
other banks.
issue, my big thing is figuring out if this is the correct bank to partner with anymore, and that may then also then trickle down to the Attorney General of how
Right.
It
partnerships.
sounds like the
of-
bank might be set up by the finance department.
Partner.
But we have more. we'll have to ask.
Why do we need a bank? I mean, you need a mortgage. I get that. But why, if you're getting $10,000 toward a down payment, why does a bank need to be involved?
Well, so this is what it covers. So it covers financial assistance available. I'm just on our website. So the first mortgage bank through Citizens, maximum total hometown down payment and closing cost assistance. So that's really what it is. It's down payment assistance and closing cost assistance. So you still need to get your mortgage. So
It is, I mean,
But that doesn't, like, if you gave me a check,
yeah.
I could use that check anywhere for any bank.
But I think this
You can
specific
do
one
it.
was set up to partner specifically with Citizens, so that Citizens would be doing those
Well,
mortgages.
hold on one second.
part of it.
But we don't need that, right?
But there
That part I don't know.
There has been there wasn't a subordinate policy adopted later that basically says the reason is that the homeowner is attempting to secure a better financing rate or term, and the homeowner is trying to withdraw equity from the property. So you can go through this part of the process, and if you do get a loan somewhere else, you can apply to use a different bank, essentially. So there's a secondary policy that was developed years later in 2003 that says you can apply for a request through the community development department. Hey, I got a better rate at this bank. The current value of the property taken from the assessor's records does not, work with the current mortgage, the appraisal of the property. There is like I said, secondary ordinance to support something like that. But the main mechanism right now is Citizens Bank. But there is essentially 20 years ago, so 10 years after the program, I'm sure they realized that people are like, well, my rate is better at another bank.
Yeah.
Again, this is where I think Elise should come in and just talk about how this is just put out in the community, how, she's the first person of contact. Like if you call Citizens Bank, they're going to refer you to her, and then they start the process. So I think we should ask her to come in and just talk about it. And then from there, we'll either have more questions that are geared towards legal and finance and the trustees and the bank end, or we'll...
And the trustees of the trust fund, they handle all of the trusts within the city and invest the money.
Yeah.
They're basically an
They're not
investment.
implementers.
No.
They're
No,
just
they
money
Hold and invest.
Managers.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, managers, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, they don't get involved in the nitty-gritty stuff. Their involvement is basically to invest the funds and get the best return for the city.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think Elise is our best bet, and then
And then legally, could we modify the terms and/or look at the surplus, for
Yeah.
other
Of that other
purposes?
fund.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, I know legal is spread thin right now, so I'm not sure we will, I just want to give everyone a fair, I'm not sure we'll have an answer, a thorough answer from legal within 2 weeks. They're spread really thin, so but we could probably get Elise here in 2 weeks. She's pretty flexible.
Yep. Yeah, probably.
I think the other questions are, with the new fund, what do we want to do with it? And
And how do you fund it?
That's always been the question.
how do you fund it, right?
We just talked about GNOD, which would have mechanisms to fund it.
I mean, as people may have seen, there's, working on the Commerce Way stuff, there's the potential for some money out of that. And I think that's one of the reasons that creates some urgency to our discussions here. So,
Good point.
Byron, you
I
were.
was going to say, you were mentioning Commerce Way. I assume that we're talking about some sort of in lieu situation as far as, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the typical uses of these funds, if you looked at the Nashua one, for example, rental assistance. Project funding, if the capital is sufficient. Let's say we had a couple of million at some point, we could lend to PHA to develop a project, or
I really think that rental assistance sticks out to me as something that, because it's, the other side of the coin as to what the home buying program should be doing.
Yeah.
And such a huge need
It's
in the
keeping
community.
people.
Yeah.
It's hard for me, like with an economic perspective, it's all supply and demand, and the idea of just artificially increasing demand by reducing the amount that it costs for a person to live in a place. This is not from a humanist perspective. This is purely economics,
sure,
right?
yeah.
Like, it makes so much more sense to me to use the payment in lieu money or the second trust
build more
money to
units.
build more units.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the only way out of the big problem.
No,
I think it'd be interesting to know, and maybe we can ask the welfare department, because we do have rental assistance, outside, there's emergency rental assistance that the city does provide.
Yeah.
The welfare department.
Yes, yes. So maybe it would be interesting if we can get that number, because I think that will also tell us what we don't know, and I think that this has been a kind of the missing part of the conversation of how many people are on the cusp. Right? Of how many people, we keep talking, again, we always talk about the 60, the 80, the 100, the 120, but there's not a lot of discussion of the 60 and below and the unhoused population or the borderline unhoused population. And we know through conversations at Haven, at Gather, that the uses of those type of facilities as crossroads, especially at Gather, when you talk to them, their usage is through the roof of people who have never ever had to worry about food versus gas. And so I think it would be interesting to know, just for this working group to know, as we're talking about housing, of how much financial assistance went out last year on the city. And I think obviously I would assume that should be information we can get from them, how much the city had to pay out, how much maybe even the state paid out in Portsmouth, because I think, again, that will give us that next kind of understanding of what's the next wave look like. Because we could be in this position where, while we do need 100% build, we won't be able to build enough to house the people that are trying to be here and maybe house the people that are about to be out on the street.
Yeah, I mean, good job.
And I think that you make a wonderful point, and the fact is that this is kind of the discussion we were having, is are we trying to attract people or keep people? I mean, that really becomes part of the
I don't think
question.
it has. I think the problem, and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I think the problem is
I'm used to being interrupted, so go ahead.
we are constantly viewing it as it's both, because we know our state has an aging demographic.
Yeah.
We know, and I will say this till I'm blue in the face, and hope everyone who watches at home, which is 0 people, are listening to this. We have a dwindling school population. We understand.
The high school is below 1,000 cities
Exactly.
for the first time.
First time ever.
Ever. We have a dwindling school population. So if I have to read online one more time, and I'm speaking to whoever's listening, that more units is going to increase our taxes because our schools, I'm going to drop kick you. No, take that off the record.
That's why we could never do an impact fee.
Yes, but so there is a need to attract younger families that will anchor here, and there's this conversation constantly of new Portsmouth. I'm 7 generations. Well, I'm only one because I was too poor to grow up here. But guess what? Ideally, my kids will be 2nd generation, and then their kids, if they decide to stay here, will be 3rd generation. But there cannot be this constant battle of, well, my family landed here in the Mayflower. Well, technically, my family was here before the Mayflower. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? There's this constant battle, and we can't have that. So I wanted, ideally, if we can remove that from this working group, and I'm not saying that anyone truly feels that divisive of it, but we have to understand that we need more people and we need people to stay.
And the other thing I was just going to say, though, too, is that, and again, I'll pick up on what Jen said, I'm talking more economics versus, personal.
But it is the economics.
Yeah, but the other thing, too, is that one of the things that, with rental, when we're talking about the first-time homebuyer program or any of those types of programs, the city is lending money that they're going to get back. I mean, it's a mortgage, it's a lien on the property.
Yeah.
So if the city gives a new home buyer $65,000 to help with their down payment, they're going to get that money back. The question is, when you give quote-unquote rental assistance, that doesn't come, my opinion, that doesn't come back.
I think
Well, and John, I'll offer up a kind of a counterpoint to what you're saying.
That's fine.
Agreeing with the idea of rental assistance can be one of the many prongs of this trust.
Right.
Rental assistance doesn't necessarily need to be giving somebody money every month to pay their rent.
Okay.
And what I mean by that, it's been discussed here a few times, that there are deed-restricted rental units that are going to expire, and so we can use this money to pay them
Good
down and
point.
get another 20 years out of them. So
Right.
that's technically rental assistance.
No, I appreciate that point, because it is a very valid
I
point.
just quickly want to add to something that you were speaking to, Jen. In my effort in Georgetown, there was money coming every year through the taxation. So there was a stream of revenue coming in every year. Strictly using in lieu of payments is going to be intermittent, and it's going to be of different value. So it will be, I think, challenging to monitor and evolve what activities occur, because this money may be coming in spurts. So there needs to be some discussion about something else that can be done.
But the point you're making is kind of what we were talking about before. Massachusetts has a vehicle to have that money come into the communities. I don't believe New Hampshire has a similar type
No
vehicle.
enabling. And Mary, I wanted to,
I think if you think about the rental assistance, there's many different ways in which you could process that. But if you think about, say, like a teacher who's working here, they are providing a significant amount of economic value, but it's most likely, if they're a para in one of our school systems, they won't be able to afford to live here.
Right.
But if we provide them rental assistance in another way, and then eventually they could look into the first-time homeliners, that's one way in which it's broader. You can also think about any sort of downtown worker, low-wage worker, someone working minimum wage. They are also providing economic value. So again, it's not an either-or, and it's not that the city will never see that money back again, because most likely they're providing a larger economic impact to the city as a whole, or public services and other things. So if I understand from like the money in, money out, but I think if you take that broader perspective, it might feel a little bit more like they both work hand in hand.
right. Byron?
Thank you.
I just wanted to, so Joanna mentioned attracting families in the student population. And there was a graphic, and I thought it was in one of the packets, but it might have been online relative to the recent assessments that went
You're
out.
talking about how many kids come from an
Good,
apartment
totally.
complex to a single-family home?
Yeah, That exact graphic. I'm talking about that graphic. So what I thought was interesting about it was it talked about single-family homes and apartments and the type of unit, but one dimension it didn't look at is where those things were located. So like, are they on a main thoroughfare? Are they in a neighborhood? Because I think, and I'd love to, maybe this is something that the zoning working group can focus on, is actually getting a look at that data from that dimension, less about apartment, single family unit and the type, and more about where it is and the services that are near it, because I think that can be really informative as to like where students are wanting to live and where families are wanting to live more, rather.
Or having to.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we're seeing it as we talked about the potential of rezoning for our elementary schools, that
Yeah.
less families with younger children can afford the median home price in the South End, which is now over $1.2 million. And we're seeing that shift towards more multifamily units on whether that it's townhouse style condos or apartment complexes. We're seeing more growth in those areas.
Yeah, and I want to see the data from that dimension, right? Like, is it single family houses, or is it the location of the place
Of the development.
of the development? Like, what services are near? Is it in a neighborhood? Is it near a park? Like, I
Yeah.
feel like those are more drivers than the actual type of unit.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I feel like that's where developers are trying to build the most units. Interesting.
Some of the other uses that are common are purchase and refurbish housing. You know, let's say something goes on the market and it's maybe a little dilapidated. There aren't that many, but occasionally.
do you mean flipping?
Well, buy it and turn it.
I don't think that's the same intention. Yeah.
Or I mean, again, another creative possibility of that is if you are taking a single family home and turning it into a multi-family, and you're going to reside on one side. You know what I mean? That's
Or
something that's
occupied.
not configured in the mortgage, in the first-time home buyers program. I think it actually doesn't even allow you to buy.
That would be an ADU creation.
You could create an ADU.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic suggestion.
Yeah, that's a great way. And then the zoning has to allow it. But
And the neighbors have to allow.
Well, this is where you can fight about individual property rights. Everyone wants their individual property rights until their neighbor wants to use
don't own your
their
view.
individual property rights.
balance, zoning is the balance between public interest and private interest. And the public interest right now is in a place it's never been before, so. You know, also, we could be paying for the design and feasibility studies for, you know, say PHA or something like that. That could be a $50,000 that could springboard us into many more units. ADUs, we've talked about. I think there's a lot of opportunity with that. So, you know, there's a pretty good menu of possibilities.
Yeah.
I'd like to offer up another one, and it's based upon my experience in Massachusetts, where the bylaws stated that if you do a 4 single-family home subdivision, you don't need to do an ADU. If you do 5, you start getting into the fractional calculations, and so it took something like an 8 or 9 lot subdivision to get a full single-family home. So most of the subdivisions that went on because of the land values never really went past 5. And so what the trust did was, when there was a development coming through where there was going to be a fractional value and the developer wanted to give cash, we said, we don't want the cash, we're going to give you the additional money to create the actual unit. So instead of accepting a fractional payment, they paid the additional fraction to get a whole. So that could be another option.
That's pretty smart. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Howard didn't think of it.
No, I didn't.
You don't know that. Howard did exist
Now,
before.
one of the problems from a fairness point of view was that the developer would start cheaping out on the fit and finish, the size. And so there needs to be the idea that it needs to be equal value.
Needs to be standards. People deserve dignity.
Another use in Manchester, they did sell off surplus property, put $2.5 million into their housing trust fund, and they recently bought a building and made it into 8 units of housing at $800 a month, specifically targeted at homeless, which is a big problem in there.
Sure.
But do we have much surplus land to sell?
Yeah.
No.
Based
Shouldn't we be
on-
holding on to that
That's
to develop
absolutely no.
ourselves?
Not to be a no in a brainstorming session, but I don't know if that's
That's
feasible.
why I was surprised that back in 2008, they were saying,
But 2008 was such a different, that's.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a long
That's
time
just
ago.
before the recession, that's still when we were building.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
K Street was shit park.
That's right.
Yeah, the Frank, what was that? The
Frank
Frank
Jones.
Jones said.
Yeah, there we go.
Proms were still at the Frank Jones Center.
Yeah. You didn't walk behind the Irving.
You didn't,
Yeah, or through the hole in the fence.
you had to
You were
be very
still
careful
jump-
on the railroad tracks,
You were
too.
still jumping the fence though over Gillies and walking that back out.
Just to circle back onto some of the funding for the trust, I thought there was some creative ideas that were floated in there, some of which I did not understand at all. But one that kind of jumped out to me was the leasing of cell phone towers. Not that that's necessarily what we would want to do, lease for a cell phone tower, but how can we creatively use properties within Portsmouth? You know, I constantly go back to solar just because I think that's going to become a much larger part of our economy as we move forward. But are there areas that we've designated as Portsmouth property that are not viable for development, but that we could put solar panels on, and then that money is going into a fund?
Jones Avenue.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of options in this open.
Billboards are another one. Doesn't take up a lot of
Yeah.
space and can make you a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
We even have any?
Billboards?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Oh, I guess, yeah, they're like,
our mayor was featured prominently.
I'll go on the record to know he did not know that was happening. I was like, right before the election, buddy.
I looked up and I was like, oh.
Yeah, so I think what we have to remember, and is how it has touched on, and John, there potentially are less mechanisms in New Hampshire than in other states, especially Massachusetts.
Can I ask for a point of clarity? The Affordable Housing Fund,
Yes.
that document that was included in the packet, that exists, right? That's just not a theoretical idea of what a New Hampshire Affordable Housing Fund could do. No, there was
One signed by
Yes,
John
that's a
Bingo.
statewide.
Yeah,
a statewide program. So there are also, you know, federal and state options for providing assistance to renters. It's not just coming out of the Portsmouth budget. Right.
They have been, I think they were part of the Court Street financing.
Yes, I think that's, in the article, that Court Street was
Yeah, Ruth Griffin is featured.
was
Yeah.
pictured on that, right.
They sell the tax credits. Is it the CDM?
Yeah, they,
That's the mechanism.
yep.
Yeah.
And
Tax credits are actually, if no one's ever done it, as a business owner, I actually purchased some of those tax credits for that building because it allowed me to take a block of money and use it to pay off my state taxes. And I was truly like a $10,000 investment, and you got like 75% of that to use towards taxes. So it's like a no-brainer for a small amount of money that you can then help. So it's a really
if
good
you have
mechanism.
like a financial advisor, you can have them flag you anytime a
Project comes up.
project to like that goes out for bonding, or the New Hampshire like the housing tax credits. You can have them flagging my investment. I don't do
This is
enforcement.
if you owe state taxes.
Correct. So as business owners, believe it or not, we pay state taxes
yeah.
unlike
Yeah,
the rest of you.
sure do.
We sure
Multiple
do.
different ways.
Yeah, we business owners do that. So we understand that purchasing those as a business owner really makes sense when you've made money that year.
Yes.
Well, and
First qualification.
again, you know, this is where I think marketing and, you know, in the same way that we need to streamline and destigmatize people using public assistance to get by, we also need to provide clarity and create like a base level of understanding of what business owners have access to, what landlords have access to, what renters have access to.
I had a random thought. Much like, and I wonder, and we might have to ask Andrew and go back, is if there was ever a policy that maybe just then fell off, that this was partially funded by the budget. Because it's like the cemetery committee in the CIP was always in there, but just never funded. And so I feel like it would be interesting to look into our budget to see if this is
Cemetery cleanup committee is funded by.
Yeah, so for years, we've had a policy that would be, they get $2,500 or $10,000 or whatever from the city for chemicals, for all of that stuff. But it was unfunded for years because we didn't have an active cemetery committee. So I'm just sitting here wondering if there's some type of policy when this was set up to tap into like either general fund or X, Y, and Z for. Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean,
okay. I'm not. The rest of this group probably. I'm not saying it correctly, but
Right.
I'm
Is
just.
there assistance for housing in the CIP or budget ever?
Yeah, and then it just went away because it never got funded because this program was.
To look as to whether or not you can take parking revenue and put it towards housing.
Coming for you, Ben.
I don't know if we legally can do that, but that's something we should look into.
There's some pretty tight restrictions legally.
There are, but
There are.
if we're doing it for people,
But there's
I just
difference
think there's got to be a way.
There's a difference between the law of metered lots and garages.
Parcelas, right?
Those are two different
Yeah.
state RSAs. Okay, so just because we could, I think, keep going on forever, I will, because we have kind of our marching orders of bringing in Elise to kind of talk about the program, maybe getting some data from the welfare office so we can kind of just, again, for our own knowledge benefit, know if it feels like there's a lot of residents on the brink and how much annually. And again, if we can look at that money and say, well, if we can put a portion of that towards permanent housing or towards, long-term affordable housing, it's not stranded funds. And then I would look to staff to see if there's any last
Legal.
comments or anything else that was not touched on.
We'll check with legal on the
Modify.
modifications necessary.
Okay.
And to expedite things, to have committee members send in their thoughts on what
Yes.
modifications should be added so we can pre-vet them before,
Homework.
yep.
Right.
Any requested modifications?
Yes.
Just looking at what this workforce housing study said in '08, capitalizing the trust fund, allocate a percentage of the annual payment that comes through the PEAS Municipal Services Agreement.
That's what I was like, there has to be some money somewhere.
The thought was PEAS is making all these jobs, they should help support housing.
Housing.
Oh, yeah.
How they doing on that?
Allocate UDAG grants on a matching
We've forgotten
basis.
about this a long time.
And,
As a neighbor, I can't wait
things
to
too.
remind them.
and then
For renegotiation.
impact fees.
Yeah, impact fees is, I think, the thing that's being left on the table that we're not looking at.
It's hard to prove the case for it.
Impact fees are difficult.
Yep.
And difficult in many different ways.
We got,
That's a whole nother conversation.
I mean, we're at 60-something% capacity on sewer. There's lots of headroom. Our school population's declining. Our water is ample.
Dover does it.
Dover, but they just are removing them.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get a waiver, but
Yeah.
The issue is if you take an impact fee and you don't actually use it for that impact, you have to give it back.
Yeah.
And it has to be
That's
for
the biggest problem.
a capital improvement.
Has to be a capital improvement that you need because of that
It's a
development.
need because of that development.
Exactly.
Oh, I guess 5 days ago they did vote to.
What about reconsidering our stance on let me think I can figure out how to word this.
So excited.
We know that vacation rental properties are in our city, and we know that they are not allowed.
Short-term rentals.
Short-term,
In residential
VRBO,
districts.
Airbnb,
This-
not allowed in
The
residential
state would
districts.
argue that they are allowed in a lot of areas.
Well, then maybe we flip our decision-making and apply impact fees to them.
Tax them.
Tax them. Take money from them. Make it
I'm
untenable. to
well, okay.
short-term rental in
I think
residential area.
we always never use the word tax, but I feel like they should be registered and they should be inspected, and that is how you do the fee collection. Is you monitor them like you would at like the Silver Street or the Hill, what used to be the Hill Street Inn, the big yellow one.
Like you do any in bed and
Like you
breakfast
do
or
any
hotel.
inn and bed and breakfast, they should need an emergency evacuation plan. They should get an inspection, and we get fees that way.
Or if it
But
was
those fees,
those go to the state.
correct me if I'm wrong, those fees need to be justified by the cost associated with performing those services.
And-
So
and no
to
more.
pick up,
Yeah.
that doesn't provide additional funds.
That's not going to give you.
So
But
it
if
nets
it's
out to
more
nothing.
closely monitored, then if it's closely monitored, then they'll be less incentivized to.
But you have to get a permit, and that permit fee doesn't have to 100% justify, when you're talking about certain things.
Make it
Isn't
so
it-
expensive that it's easier just to rent the property. on a
Yeah, if
long-term
it's, or
basis.
if it's more closely monitored by the city. I thought short-term rentals was not technically allowed in the city.
It's
That's
a
right.
shadow
I
market.
can add a little-
Residential districts, they are
But if
not
it was more, I don't know if you can monitor it, but if it was more closely monitored than with some sort of penalty.
There are communities in New Hampshire that have embraced Verbo
Yeah.
and all those other places, and what they've done is say, okay, you want to rent out for the weekend or a week or something like that, you're going to have to do an annual permit with us, and we're going to have a right to go in and inspect it for safety, and they generate some proceeds off of that to ensure, and it didn't really deter people, but it helped the city track where and how much the housing was going to short-term rental.
This has been a long-term, I guess, no pun intended, a long-term battle in Concord of what is, again, the live for your die state. What are you
Yes.
at right to do with your property?
Yeah.
And then you look at like a place like Conway, right, in North Conway, where Airbnb initially in my head was started as like, I'm renting someone's house while they're out of town for the weekend. And
Yeah.
then you have giant corporations, and I can go down a tangent, buying them. And it's like, just build a hotel.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
it can be a financial income stream for some folks, but it can also be.
It can also kill the affordability of
A
renting
private
units
investor.
for
Yeah,
workers,
that's
and
the
that's a
problem.
big problem.
Or just homes for sale. I mean, you have.
Right.
I was just in Savannah, and I thought I was renting an Airbnb, like a regular schmegular Airbnb, and I walk into the building, and it's clearly now a hotel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was like, well, this was put on here like I was renting an apartment. And it's clearly like they bought out this whole condo unit. So there is a balance, but it's hard, especially if any of you have ever had to go to Concord and testify. It's really hard when there are other communities who look at Portsmouth like we are paved in gold and everyone eats caviar and there's no struggles here.
Yeah.
And so you're going to testify against someone from Francistown, which they have 22 kids in their elementary school that they are fighting to keep open. You know what I mean? And they do not. It's
nothing.
Yeah, they cannot grasp that we want a $2 a night pillow occupancy fee because they assume that we are so wealthy and that our residents can just eat it. So it's a hard balance, and you have 5 or 6 cities fighting against 136 other municipalities, and there's that balance of
There's no balance.
there's no balance. I just saw it at the New Hampshire Municipal Association where we're trying to agree on some things, and I'm like, I think we voted that housing should be listed as a regional resource along with natural green space and X, Y, and Z, and people looked at me like I had 3 heads until I explained to them that a housed population is a healthier population, is a workforce population, is an educated population, which then in turn is a resource for our region.
This would be a long shot, but you can form incremental tax districts. So you could form a downtown tourism district, have a tax increment, and say that the benefit you're getting for that is we're giving you housing that's going to give you workers. That's a stretch. But,
Then you
know,
have small businesses like myself that are like, I'm already
Yeah,
paying
the unintended
triple.
consequences feel really.
That's where
Yeah.
it's the ripple effect, right? It's like
So I would question whether I love the payment in lieu idea.
yeah.
Do we need to grow this specific trust more? Is it really the city that should be solving this problem?
Yeah.
Or should it be our focus to make it easier for the people who do this every day to solve these problems?
Well, I think there can be a partnership, right? So it's like the city, we don't need to have $100 million in this trust if we have $1 million and then we're teaming with a nonprofit and we're like, okay, we will give you $50,000 to do this traffic study, X, Y, and Z, water impact study, da-da-da. We'll eat that burden so that it's easier for you to develop.
Or we get a piece of land and we let a nonprofit developer.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that, like, how would we expend these funds? Like you said, I don't think we should be developers. That's
Yeah,
not
and I
our
don't
job.
know if this trust, if we need to, actually, I think the cell tower idea is great and the billboard, whatever, but like, I don't know if our singular goal should be to make this trust have $1 bajillion in it.
Why not?
Because I don't think that the city is the best answer to solve the problem.
How has the private sector solved the problem over the last 10, 15 years?
I think the city's job is to make it easier to have the private sector do that, to remove zoning restrictions, to remove parking requirements, to make it easier to go through the whole process of getting something approved.
But you were looking through things from an economic lens. Isn't money, doesn't money talk? I mean, if we had a bank, if we had the ability to finance projects, I agree with you. We probably shouldn't be developers. But if we have every toolbox or every tool in the toolbox at our disposal with this housing trust, then we're the most agile, we're the most flexible, the most capable of
I
making
don't
things
know
happen.
if that's true though. Like, I don't think that we are, based on the rules of city government.
Right.
It's not set up to be an agile group.
Yeah, trust me, we're not agile.
But you're less agile if you cut off an appendage, if you don't have the ability to do something.
And I think one of the things is that, if I can pick up on what Jen's saying, is the fact is that if it's the city, then politics comes into play. And where people see it all the time when you talk about doing something in the city. This might be the right location to do it, but the neighbors don't want it. And so that's one of
They
the...
have an impact fee.
What's that? No, and I think
I'm
that's one of the problems with municipal government is the fact is it's not driven by economics. It's driven, I mean, that's part of it, but you also are answerable to everybody in the city, and it makes it difficult. So that's one of the reasons that municipal government doesn't do a lot of things outside of running the government well, because they're not set up for it, and they have too many outside sources. I mean, it's kind of interesting, and the fact is you take a place like Rochester and Claremont that have their own music, the Opera House in Rochester, the one in Claremont, those are part of the city. Back 30 years ago, before the music hall was in Portsmouth, the city of Portsmouth was looking to buy the music hall, the Civic Theater. But one of the things that we were told is the city doesn't do a good job as a landlord, especially with nonprofits. So that's one of the problems we have to think about is that, yes, we probably could have all the tools, but would we have the ability to use those tools in a way that would be effective?
So, oh, go ahead.
Do you mind?
No.
I'm having trouble following the line of thought that the workforce housing fund would be the city being a landlord or a developer. Is that what you were?
I think we were
Implying
going
or
down a
inferring?
line of path that was like, how do we create more money for this housing trust? And I'm not, my own personal view is that while I love the payment in lieu idea, and I think it's very important that we have a place for that payment to go, it is not my goal to make the housing trust have a lot of money, because I don't think that is, like, if you add taxes, if you add incentive payments, if you, whatever, like, for the purpose of getting more money in here, I don't think that's going to solve your problem as much as the other tools we have in our toolbox.
Well, we need both. The scale needed of housing has to be the private sector, but the private sector is going to have gaps where people fall through the cracks, and that's where the city comes in.
Yes. Completely.
I totally agree with that, and I fight on this all the time because I have the same inclination where I'm like, if the market needs to solve this problem. But I think the biggest problem that I run into when I go down that train of thought is for the market to solve the problem of affordability for 60% of AMI, everyone's net worth in the city would have to drop. Like everyone's property value would have to go down significantly for that to be like a fundamental solution. And the radical in me thinks sure, but at the same time the probability of that happening is zero. That's never going to happen.
And it would be devastating if it did.
Yeah.
Yes.
It would actually be an economic crash.
Right. And during the last crash, the home values didn't go down. They stayed the same.
You want to go to public comment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Public comment?
Public comment? Come on up. Please state your name.
Online people stuff.
Just while it's on my mind, Byron, that actually won't necessarily happen. Because you have...
You'll need the mic a little closer to
Can we
you.
do that? Here we go. Because you have such a supply shortage, which, by the way, is intentional by the city. It's the policy of the city to prevent housing from being built at a market rate. You have demand that's up here, a supply down here, and until you hit that level, it actually doesn't require housing prices to drop. On average, they can go down, but overall, you can still maintain the income and still bring in more affordable folks until that's met. There can be something of a transition there, but it can be done. I had some notes written here. Hold on a second. 2027, less than 3 years from now, 100th anniversary of Portsmouth adopting zoning. Portsmouth was one of the first 3 towns to adopt zoning in the state of New Hampshire in 1927. My concern is really the public sector versus the private sector, and Jen, you spoke eloquently about that and nailed it. We've talked about Commerce Way, and that's a public, the amendments that are going there, and my concern is with the inclusionary zoning, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. But we tend with the public sector, we can build here, we can build there. We try to minimize cost. When it comes to the private sector, we keep trying to layer on cost and extract something out. Now, if you've ever seen any, like The Godfather or Goodfellas, they do exactly the same thing. They extract something in exchange for something, and everyone gets in line. We get a house here, we get a house there. But until Jen brought it up, there was no conversation tonight about actually changing the zoning. None. And I haven't heard any of that come from the planning department. What zoning rules can we change that will increase supply? Plan for affordability. What can we change? Height restrictions, right? There's the one, that's one of the density carrots. We're going to restrict the height of buildings across citywide. They're restricted. Citywide. Floor area ratios. Citywide. Waste land, increase cost, and reduce supply. Pretty basic. In 1971, Fairfax, Virginia established inclusionary zoning for housing. And it kind of began to spread. There's roughly 950 or something communities in the country today that have those types of programs. But it's also spread all over the world. In 1981, Robert Ellickson did the first study on inclusionary zoning and stated that it is going to reduce the supply and it's going to increase cost of housing overall, not the workforce housing. You'll get some units here and there, but overall it will reduce it. 2001, Jenny Schutz, who she wrote a book like 3 years ago called Fixer Upper, but she did a study with 3 other folks. Wrote a study called Silver Bullet or Trojan Horse. The amount of affordable housing produced under IZ has been modest and depends primarily on how long IZ has been in place. Results from suburban Boston suggest that IZ has contributed to increased housing prices and lower rates of production. In San Francisco, same thing occurred, increasing housing prices. We don't have an affordable housing crisis. We have a housing policy crisis. And until the policies and the approaches change, it will not be solved. This showed up on my door 2 days ago. It was just published. Sarah Bronin was the planning chair in Hartford, Connecticut. She's also an architect. She's also a land use attorney. And she wrote the following. And she changed, it's interesting, they actually ended up rewriting, throwing out Hartford zoning altogether, restarting from scratch, because it's so difficult to go through. She was talking about Pittsburgh. Proponents argue that integrating affordable and market rate housing produces better health, economic, and educational outcomes for disadvantaged residents. And that's a good outcome, right? We want that. They also argue that inclusionary zoning could help address the rising rents that had pushed longtime residents from the city. However, no research has shown that inclusionary programs actually create new housing. On the contrary, existing research suggests that inclusionary zoning actually increases overall prices because developers recoup the costs of building their units by charging more for market rate units. One study found that this is specific to California, supply was reduced by 7% and prices increased by 20% during a 10-year period in which inclusionary zoning was adopted. Opponents believe that for these reasons, inclusionary zoning constitutes a hidden tax on real estate development. She also pointed out, let's see here. In addition to the obstacles that persist in systems still structured by long outdated land use regulations, is that, sometimes the uncomfortable fact that sometimes even policies that seem conducive to making housing more equitable may not in the end actually accomplish that goal. And there are too many antiquated policies within zoning. Someone said, I think the zoning book here is like 600 pages deep or something like that. It's bad. You can't govern with that. You can't even, working through it, you can't even read it. She actually had and I've only read like 10 pages of this thing, but they eliminated, for housing, public meetings. Yeah, in Hartford, when she was there. In any case, the last part about IZ is it lacks scalability, and you also touched upon that. I think, Tracy, you mentioned it. If you can't, you're dependent upon others to provide it, whereas the market will build what you let them build. And yes, it'll be at higher prices to start, typically. But then you have what's the filtering effect that goes on with that. You create more units. We need more supply, period. And getting a house here and there and there and there, it can be done, but that's a slow, long build. It has been 10 or 15 years, what's happened over the past 10 or 15 years. Housing is a long cycle, and these zoning rules have been in place for decades. We're talking about 50 years of inclusionary zoning policy, having been studied, and virtually every study that's been produced says it results in less housing overall, because of the constraints put in on the housing supply intentionally. It's designed typically for economic segregation, to keep certain folks out of a particular income. So we solve for that by having the lower workforce housing units. If we focus on the bigger housing supply need, you can make it happen. Let the market, free the market, unshackle it, let it happen, and you can get there. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody on Zoom?
Nobody's on.
Nobody's on Zoom.
Nobody's on Zoom.
Okay. Any last minute?
I think this was a wonderful meeting. Thank you.
You know what? It's almost as enjoyable as trees and greens. Just kidding, guys.
Peters
What are we
Music.
talking about?
Mind if I take
Tree,
yours?
tree and greenery. Okay. Great, that's on the record. Okay,
Why am I not on
motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.